Let's continue and open up the next JavaScript file, which is icons.js. Right away, let's change extension of this file on TS. And if we'll take a look at this module, we can see that this module is pretty simple. Here we just import several view components, then defining several constants, and eventually defining an object with keys that correspond to those constants and values that correspond to imported components. So since this module is pretty simple, let's come back to this in one of the next lessons when we're gonna start working on icons. And for now, let's move on and switch over to the next file, main.js. Let's change extension of this file on TS, and just because we are importing this file in index.html, here we also have to change this extension on TS. One more time, let's open up main.ts, and here we can just assign explicit type to the return value of this closure. As we can see, this closure does not return anything, so let's annotate this return type as void, like so. The next file is router.js. As always, the first thing we do is change the extension on TS. And let's consider the first constant, routes. This constant stores page components in such a format that every key corresponds to a valid page name and every value corresponds to page component. For now, let's just skip this constant and move on to the next one. And later in this lesson, we're gonna come back to the first constant. Let's consider current page constant. So this constant should store only valid page names. And as you may remember, in one of the previous lessons, we have already defined the type which describes valid page names. That is this type, page name. And since we're gonna need this type in several files, let's just extract this type into a separate module. Let's call this module types.ts, cut that type from this file, and move it to our newly created file types.ts and export it from here. As we can see, this type depends on several constants, so let's just copy import of all these constants from router.ts and move this import to types.ts. And now we easily can reuse this type in several modules. First of all, let's go to constants.ts and import this type right here. But since this is only the type, we can explicitly mention it. When we are importing this, we just need to use type keyword like so. And this way we're making it clear to readers of our code that the page name is actually the type. So now we're going to reuse this type as the type for current page constant inside router.ts. And of course, this should be imported from our types module. And just like in the previous file, let's mention keyword type while importing this module in here. But here we are facing a problem because currently TypeScript was able to infer that the type of the return value of normalized page hash function is a string, but our current page constant should store value of the type page name. So we need to explicitly say that normalized page hash function is going to return the value of the type page name. So let's use type annotation right here. And if we'll take a look inside of this conditional, in here TypeScript thinks that the page is of string type. But in fact, if we have gotten inside of this if, we know for sure that the page constant stores valid page name because isPage valid function checked this already inside if conditional. So we can explicitly cast the type of the page constant to page name like so. And now as we can see, TypeScript is happy. And of course, if we're gonna try to return invalid type from this function, right away we're gonna see an error. So this function is safe now. By now this file has only one error, which is related to the parameter page of the navigate function. Here we just need to explicitly annotate type of this parameter, which is page name. And just like we're always doing, let's also mention that this function does not return anything, hence we are using void type in here. And now we are coming back to the first constant in this file, which is rows. As was mentioned before, this constant stores mapping between valid page names and corresponding page components. But if we're going to use another key here, which is not valid page name, TypeScript doesn't tell us that we have made a mistake. So we need to come up with a proper type to this constant, so that every time we're gonna use invalid values in this object, TypeScript will notify us about it. And thankfully, there is already a default type in TypeScript that we can use in here, and this type is called record. This is a generic type, which means it accepts type arguments, and as the first type argument, we have to specify the type of the keys of this object. And because we need to ensure that the keys of this object can only be valid page names, we're going to use our type page name right here. And as the second argument, we have to specify type of the values of those keys. For now, let's just put any. And right away we can see that TypeScript highlights invalid property right here, because this property is not valid page name. And also, if this object will miss at least one page name, for example page progress, TypeScript is going to notify us that this object should contain all available page names. Because our custom type page name that we have specified as the first argument to the type record is actually a union of 3 strings. So all of these pages have to be included in this object, and then TypeScript will be happy. But still we can improve the type of this constant even further, because currently, if we'll try to use some invalid value for any of these keys, we're not gonna get any error, but we have to ensure that the values can only be valid view components. And for that we can import special type from the view library, which is called component, which describes all view components. And this type then we can use as the second argument to this record type like this. And now if we're going to use any value that is not view component for any of these keys, right away we're gonna see an error. So now the type is pretty good and this constant rows is safe. Let's go back to the browser and make sure that after all our changes, we haven't broken our application. Let's continue development in the next lesson, and the link to the source code of this project will be, as always, in the video description.